Podstock from Woodstock. It's gonna be far out.
I'm Lenny Block. John Sebastian, the Lovin Spoonful, Woodstock 69, Bob Dylan, The Doors, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Longtime Woodstock, New York resident John Sebastian digs deep into all that and much more on this first ever Podstock from Woodstock.
Come on!
Grab a beverage of choice and roll one up if you desire. We're going on a magical ride. This is Podstock from Woodstock. We decided for Season 1, Episode 1 to invite rock royalty into the studio.
Or maybe just the guy who was hanging around outside the studio.
He was hanging out, so we invited him in. The door opened, and John Sebastian walked in. John, so good to see you.
Great to see you.
And even better to hear you. I mean, this is awesome. I think the last time I saw you, I was walking around the supermarket, and I looked over in the fruits and vegetables section, and there was John Sebastian. Hi, John.
Pondering something, huh?
And then I'm checking out, and there's Donald Fagen in aisle 5. So It's like... You go to the supermarket, and who do you expect to see, right?
Always a fun place. Always a fun place.
Have you ever Googled or Wikipedia'd yourself to see what's up there?
I don't think I've had the patience to do that, but...
There's a boatload of stuff on you, by the way.
You're looking at a pretty thick little chunk of paper.
Look at all this. There. Yeah. Well, I wanted to mention that when you go to Wikipedia and you put in John Sebastian... the way it's supposed to happen, your name pops up first. Do you have any idea who the second Sebastian is that pops up?
There's Juan Sebastian, the Brazilian who recently passed away, if I have my facts straight. But his celebrity is enormous in Brazil and I guess a few other countries. It dwarfs anything of mine.
You are incorrect, sir.
Sebastian Bach?
It's Johann Sebastian Bach is the second. And I wanted to ask you about your dad, who was a classically trained harmonica player.
That's right. He kind of invented classically training harmonica.
I mean, I see the oboe and the bassoon and the strings. Where's the harmonica? There is a harmonica, or I guess it can be in a classical concert.
Really, this was something that Dad became passionate about. After a very successful career, one of those musicians who was highly visible in the fashionable terraces overlooking Central Park. You know, all of those radio shows where they'd have good evening from, overlooking beautiful Central Park.
From the RCA studios in New York.
And that's good.
and they'd have a whole orchestra in the studio playing live, right?
That was another thing, yes. But so Dad really became impassioned about getting good composers to write for the instrument. The guy that wrote Tubby the Tuba did a beautiful thing called Street Corner Concerto. His name was George Kleinsinger.
So I guess that's the harp playing's in the DNA. I know. Talk about your early influences other than your dad. I know Mississippi John Hurt is mentioned pretty high on your A list of people.
Oh, certainly. I mean, I was in this absolute nirvana of country music. You would call it country blues or old-timey or
jug band.
All of a sudden, this was available to us, especially as little spoiled brat commie New York kids. we were just really having fun with all of that, sudden availability. Go over to Rory Block's dad's sandal shop one day. Oh, dear, there's Son House playing on the weekend. And Rory talking all of them out of how do you do this? Oh, gee, Mr. Hurt, I play a little classical guitar. I'd go, oh, damn it, he's going to tell her stuff. He'll never tell me.
You did kind of the reverse commute, born in Greenwich Village. Have you been down to the Village in the last couple of years?
Oh, I certainly have my my people are there.
Right.
I have to go and check into a lot of different folks that have remained villagers. Many of them were born villagers, and so I do keep in touch with New York. Don't get in there as much as I want, but I owe Matt Humanoff a visit, so I'm going in soon.
It's funny you mention that because I got a call on my cell phone last week. John Sebastian's calling. Hi, Lenny. I'm ready to do that Podstock thing with you. I go, come on up. Let's do it. And I'm going into New York, and you said to me, I got a couple of guitars at Matt Humanoff's. Would you mind picking them up?
Oh, right. Yeah.
And, we could take a road trip. I'll gladly drive you in.
I have been interested in instruments since I was 17 or 18 and began working at a little Italian classical guitar shop mainly to accumulate enough goodwill over at the shop for them to build me a classical guitar. And so that began a chain of events that really had a lot to do with how I became as a musician.
He's a magician too. Don't let me fool you. It's magic, people. Somewhere I read that you own is it a Harvey Citron baritone guitar?
Yes.
Is that correct?
I own a Harvey Citron baritone, and I'm currently traveling frequently with a Joe Veillette baritone.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's all townies.
He's playing homegrown guitars from the
it.
town of Woodstock. I love that. Now, John and I talk about the 50th anniversary of the original 1969 Woodstock Music and Arts Festival and how I didn't get to go but lived it through the soundtrack of the motion picture. Hey, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe at your favorite podcast place, including the Woodstock Podcast Network at radiowoodstock.com. John Sebastian, our very special guest on Podstock from Woodstock. You've never been asked any questions about Woodstock, so maybe we should just skip over that one. Here comes the 50th anniversary. One of the things that always sticks out, because in my time as a 13-year-old, we would listen to the album again and again and again. And as much as the music, the stage announcements were a part of our growing up. We would talk to each other like we were on the stage at Woodstock.
Yes, right.
And
right.
your announcement about the child being born,
yes,
is classic, and I think it went something like, "Some cat's old lady had a baby. That kid's going to be far out." it was so perfect. There's a great scene also in the movie of you leaving the stage, and putting your head in your hands and like shaking, like, what the heck was that? Can you flash back to that moment? And
actually, the moment you're talking about is entering the stage.
Oh.
And the gesture came to me. Me and Zalyanovsky were really taken with some of the great old blues guys, and we would even go as far as to begin to, for our own laughs and enjoyment, imitate them in their particular physical affectations. And one of Sonny Terry's expressions to express "I'm losing my mind" was that gesture with both hands coming forward from the forehead.
Oh,
and so that stuck with us, and it became a gesture that Zal and I would frequently use. I mean, frequently enough that I even did it without having him around.
So it's 1969, and you take the stage, and you were a bona fide rock star. You had more hits than every other band there put together.
That atmosphere was very relaxed. Security was a thing of the future. It didn't exist. If you wanted to go back and say hi to somebody, you did. And the same applied to the people that were playing the shows, because we had already, most of us, experienced being on one show or another. My gosh, me and Felix Papalardi and Leslie West we'd probably done a half a dozen shows because it was too perfect. Oh, this guy can do his act with one guitar, and then he gets off, and there's room for the 8 refrigerator-sized amplifiers. He can work in front of it. He doesn't care. Hi, Leslie.
Do you have any plans for the 50th this year? Can we go to your backyard and light a bonfire and have you sing? You can be our camp counselor. You could sing a song.
Hey, I got 5 years as a camp counselor. I wouldn't be a novice. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting summer. I do have at least 3 things that are vaguely Woodstock related.
Okay.
And then just a regular show at Bethel, also a little later. And so, yeah, especially my August is going to be hopping.
Who haven't you played with that, you have on your bucket list that you'd like to work with? Are there any names out there of folks?
Brian Setzer comes to mind.
And I'm going to throw out a couple of names, and maybe you can give me your impressions. A couple hours ago, I played Roadhouse Blues on the radio by The Doors, and somebody called up, "That's John Sebastian on harp." And, yeah, that's you all over that record. Did you do that in the studio with them?
Yes, I did. What happened was Paul Rothchild at the time was not only the Doors producer, but he had made several of my records. And this is going to sound odd to your listeners who, of course, have a modern-day impression where the Doors are a much more visible thing to most younger folks than the Spoonful. But at that particular time, Paul Rothchild's pitch to me was, he said, I think that you'd be a good influence on Jim. And I hadn't been paying much attention to the Doors, frankly. The sort of pop culture part of the Doors I hadn't been paying attention to, but after getting a few reports, I could see that Jim was starting to enter into a period where he wasn't always the same Jim that they were trying to record. Forget John Sebastian, Lonnie Mack was playing bass. Oh, wow. That was, I think, if there was anything going to make us all behave, it was going to be Lonnie Mack playing bass, and he played so good. And it provided a kind of an entree. I ended up seeing him several times. I played with him a little bit, but it was a wonderful, fun afternoon, and everybody. It was one of the situations where everybody knew their job, and it was just very easy to do.
You turned Bob Dylan down? Was that the? Did I read that? Who turns down Bob Dylan? I think he wanted you to go on tour with him. Right?
As I was doing it, I was hearing the little voice in my head going, "Sebastian, you could barely afford a $60 a month apartment last year. You're turning down Bob Dylan." Well, what happened was the Lovin Spoonful was actually out in a funny little hotel on Long Island that with no heat that closes for the winter, but we were using it because it did have a kind of a dance-related ballroom part of it, and we were using that to rehearse in. And, of course, that's in the day when the telephone was in a booth outside the hotel. So only when you weren't playing would you even hear the telephone. But it did happen to ring between tunes, and I pick it up and goes, hey, John, hey, it's Bob. He said, I don't know, I was thinking maybe, we could, I got to go on the road and do something. You could, if you wanted to, you could come along and, hey, you wouldn't have to do it. You could try it. And, you didn't have to, if you didn't want to do it, you wouldn't have to. And I'm listening to this pitch and I'm going, he's asking me to play bass. Well, now, we had actually, and there are pictures right in this very town of Bob and I sitting in the Depresso. I was playing bass and he was playing something else. And he kind of got introduced to me as a guy who was maybe a little more rock influenced than many of his more famous folk contacts. So I think he was showing interest. That was the dawn of him showing interest in playing as a rock and roll group and not as a one guy, one guitar act. It was wonderful that it happened. But as I told Bob, I said, I've kind of gotten myself committed here with these three guys, and we even kind of have an idea of what we want to do. So I couldn't just pull out and let them do it because it's the four of us kind of an idea. You don't get arguments from a guy like that. Okay, it was very kind of, there you go. And, of course, he certainly hasn't had any problem finding good bass players.
Singer, songwriter, and Woodstock townie John Sebastian. He's played with everybody. This is Podstock from Woodstock. David Bromberg, you did some work with David as well?
Yes. Yes, whenever possible.
Yeah.
I just so enjoy
he does,
my time with David. Yeah, and over the last few years, a number of my very favorite players who are also like fabulous accompanists have been joining me on these various little side projects. David Grisman and I had some lovely times in his little made-up garage studio and put out an album called Satisfied. And of course, Jimmy Vivino and I are kind of related to the barn whenever that gets going, and he needs a harmonica / guitar player who won't play above the third fret. He calls me.
David Crosby's coming back to the barn, I know, and he usually has guests. I did not know for the longest time that you played on Deja Vu. Yes. You're the heartbreak on Deja Vu.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful piece too. Expecting a call from David, maybe. I did see you at Colony Woodstock with Maria Muldaur a while back.
Yeah,
and you're blowing harp, and I think you're playing guitar. I'm going. Like Paul Simon, you're a highly underrated guitar player because your songwriting is so brilliant that it almost supersedes your guitar work. But your guitar work is stellar. I love hearing. Hearing you
thank
play.
you. And I love hearing Simon's.
Smallest hands in show business.
Oh, come on.
Do you want to talk about your biggest failure or maybe your biggest disappointment?
Gee, let's see. Well, recently not getting the Applebee's commercial. That was pretty good.
Okay. You want to cross over and we just talk about how about your biggest success that when they come down from Mars and they say, who's this John Sebastian guy? Biggest success.
I'd say, man, I played with Johnny Johnson. I played with Hubert
Sumlin.
Yeah.
How many Ed Sullivan shows did you do? You lost count.
I didn't keep count, but we were very lucky that Ed appreciated the Spoonful. We were all ready to be like, supercilious and, what does this guy know about, like, real cool rock, because we're so cool and he's so square and everything. And then he goes to do our introduction and explains to his audience that this is the American answer to the Beatles, that that they're taking an American style of music, and I forget the exact wording, but the four of us are staring at each other going, we're going to have to reassess our opinion about Big Ed. So, yeah, Ed really really appreciated the Spoonful, and we were lucky to have his ear.
Talk about Welcome Back, that you brought in a whole new generation of fans to John Sebastian in the late 70s.
Yes, and a little broader slice too, as I would find out about 15 years after that show, within 1 year, I think I spoke to 8 different rappers that were adjusting Welcome Back in one way or another.
And they wanted your blessing? Or your
yes,
yeah.
Well, usually my blessing. And they were always assured that I was going to be angry about like MFs and stuff like that. And I said, no, just don't do the homophobic stuff.
Right.
And I'm fine with, whatever the vernacular is, I don't know it. So why don't you guys have fun with it and call me when you need a consult or something. So that was a great little second wave. It was back when there were still royalties, I tell you.
John has been riding the musical waves for more than 5 decades, from the Spoonful to Woodstock, to Welcome Back, Mr. Kata, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is Podstock from Woodstock. Back to the mid-'60s for a moment, and I'm going to unabashedly tell you that Darling Be Home Soon is in my top 5 of all time.
Beautiful.
In the middle, the string section comes in. Was that your idea? Was that a producer's idea? That happened with a lot of music around that time period. I know Simon and Garfunkel, strings would like mysteriously appear in the middle of the song. Were you happy with that arrangement?
Oh, most assuredly I was. That was also, the setting is important because Darling Be Home Soon originally was one of the compositions to be involved in a movie called You're a Big Boy Now, which was Francis Coppola's second at all visible movie. It would still be a while before he became the famous guy, but that setting gave us a lot of opportunities because there were orchestra dates. You'd set them aside and you'd have the cues already, but the guys would come in and they'd do whatever was left. And in most cases, for example, Darling Be Home Soon did have a basic track, and the orchestral overdub was a second overdub. It definitely seemed like a good idea because in the movie, there's this moment where you've got to create a little bit of a swirl because this guy is experiencing love with the bad girl, and it's like as good as it can be. And so that was part and parcel to the decision to say, oh, yeah, of course, we need that. We need that.
I can hear it and see it. John Sebastian, Podstock from Woodstock, Season 1, Episode 1. Can I thank you for the great relief it is to talk to you?
Well, thank you very much.
What brought you, John Sebastian, from Greenwich Village to Woodstock in the first place?
Well, we're right back to the beginning of our interview because what brought me here was Albert Grossman and Bob Dylan. In about 1962, I was on the road for about a week with Bob, just as a kind of a hanger-on, with he and Victor Maymoutis in that famous station wagon. And one guy, one guitar, one spotlight, and I'd be in the rafters like crying my eyes out. It was so important.
John Sebastian, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
You're
and we love you.
Welcome.
And look for John on the road this summer, and look for the projects, and go to johnbsebastian.com for more. Thanks to our good friend John B. Sebastian. You can find out more at johnbsebastian.com and at podstockfromwoodstock.com. We're available on all your favorite podcast locations, including the new Woodstock Podcast Network. Special thanks to Radio Woodstock WDST. Justin Foy from Higher a Bum Studios, Dana Winston, my cat Bear, and of course, you. See you next time on Podstock from Woodstock. Lenny Block.
Podstock from Woodstock. It's gonna be far out.